Hey, hello, Riverland. That was the music of musician I really adore. His name is Jordi Zaval. He's an enthusiast about ancient music, and he's a viol player. I probably brought his name up already, and probably will bring him up again. Few business notes before we get going. Here it is Tuesday, September 21st. And I want to stay in sync this week. I try to get you the videos the day that we're having class, so to speak, Monday, Wednesday, Friday. Although I got a little behind, as you know, on that last short video. I shot that and I wondered, why did that come home to roost at only 24 and a half minutes? Well, I forgot that little part about giving you a history of Comp 1 and freshman composition in the United States of America. Maybe I'll get back to that. Maybe that could be a Wednesday thing for 2 days from now. Nothing has to happen in sequence for an abstract random like me. So it's the last day of summer. It's kind of a last day of summer edition of our little course. Tomorrow, some of you know, I don't know what time of the day will happen, but it's what we call the autumnal equinox, right? It's that very precise midway point between the summer solstice and the winter solstice. And that's fine by me. I know that the trees are just roaring color-wise up in Brainerd, in my northern kingdom, down here in my southern kingdom. I've got maple trees that I don't deserve, gigantic ones on the south part of my 20 acres here on our little lake. I don't cook out as much syrup as I used to. The boys are grown, so it's just kind of me out in the woods, dithering around, an old dude in the woods. Tapping trees, but some people think that my maple syrup is the best. It has to do with the chemistry of the trees and a few things. And I showed this. I didn't think to show this to my 9 o'clock and 10 o'clock classes today, but I shouldn't even be teaching in the morning. I'm not a morning person. It's right about noon I start waking up. And I thought it would be a good day to show classical mythology some of the food I grow. One of the vivid pleasures of my life is growing my own organic food. Got a number of gardens. I've got a neglected vineyard, but a much attended to orchard. And that's why I've got beautiful apples, not as many as last year, and just a billion pears. And I noticed this morning after my run that they are starting to fall. I guess I got to put it right here if it's going to focus, because the camera wants to focus on my eyes. So I'll be making pear juice in the next few days. There's a little trick. They're not quite ready to go into the cider press when you bring them off the tree and pick them up off the ground, off the tarps that I got to lay. I'll be bringing them in by the 5-gallon bucket, and they got to sit in the house, and the sugar content goes up, and you just wait for the precise moment to do it. And I don't know when that is, because I'm a gardener, among other things. Any other business notes? Yes. I get a little break this week from my college, my main job. This is not a backup job. This is just as important as anything I'm doing in Brainerd. But on Wednesday, we're having Student Success Day virtually. It's a day we have every year, and it's really trimmed down for, I think I mentioned it, for a number of years, a long time. I've been given a presentation on procrastination in the Chalberg Theater, and I'm the king of it at my college. And it's just not going to happen this year. So I'm going to take some days, make pear sauce, try to make some firewood, and I know I'm behind on the student writing, but I'm getting going actually. So I've got kind of a different class for you today because of an experience that I had last night, and I need to talk for a little while, and it won't have very much to do with English, I don't think, but it will definitely be about storytelling, and it's more of a life thing. And I take a tiny risk in speaking the way I'm going to today, because I want to talk about life and a way of seeing it. And my prefatory remark before I get going is to simply tell you something that many students don't understand. Some students go into classrooms at Central Lakes College and are like, wow, he just said God, he said the word God. He just said something spiritual, theological, religious, whatever. To some kids that feels illegal, like you shouldn't do that in a secular institution, and most teachers don't. But that's the way I am. And if you're offended, you're offended. But in a legal sense, The American Civil Liberties Union, that's hard to say, the ACLU, that I'm not much of a fan of. They've ensured that teachers in the United States of America, we can mention God. You can't teach classical mythology or intro to the humanities or anything in the humanities without it coming up. We can talk about it, but we are not to teach about it. And if I cross that line today, well, I've been a line crosser today. I think I'm mainly telling stories, but this is what I want to say to you. You know this maybe. Most of you are young, and most of you are going to go off to four-year schools if the world never gets back together again, which I don't think is going to happen anytime soon. I'll talk about that later. But when you go to, in a normal year, when you go to a university or college, you're dreaming of a great student worker position, right? It'll help pay your tuition. Now, by ideal, I mean a student job on campus that enables you to do schoolwork at the same time. Many jobs are not like that. If you're on the grounds crew, you're raking leaves. If you're in the dish crew, you're in there at 6 o'clock in the morning taking the trays with everybody's breakfast dishes. But sometimes, like if you get a job in the library, get a job at an information desk, or get a job like what I got when I was a boy at St. John's University, it's fantastic to be able to do schoolwork and make a little money at the same time. So when I was young, at St. John's, as once I was, I got a job as a dispatcher for security. And it just meant that when I did it episodically throughout the school year, or full-time summer work, right? I did it full-time. I did not go home once I arrived at St. John's. I was a dispatcher, and I did it from 11 o'clock at night till 7 o'clock in the morning. And my lips are getting chapped. We'll see how I do here. But the only reason I had to be in that living room was because it was for the purposes of emergency. So I had a computer, an old IBM XT, I had a telephone, and anytime anything bad happened, I was supposed to be, the person you would call and maybe let the security officers know what was going on. Well, nothing much happened that summer except for when the JCs came and really tore the campus up. It was quiet night after night after night. A couple monks died that summer, and I just had to call the mortician. But it was this really a wonderful way to spend my summers when I was a kid. I could play guitar all night long. I could read poetry. I could watch movies. And I learned how to sleep sitting up in a chair in case Brother Mike came down to see if I was on the ball. And I remember one night I fell asleep. This is the sort of the spiritual part of it. And I'm saying this to every Comp 1 class from here to Brainerd to Long Prairie. I fell asleep, and my eyes opened up at about 2 o'clock in the morning. And when they opened up, I was watching a televangelist. This older black dude was on TV, and it must have been something about the fire and brimstoneness of whatever he was saying. But it got my attention, and this guy was yelling at me, and he was making an argument. He was saying, if you swear, if you say a profane word, this is a topic you've got to cover in a class about language. If you swear, he said, it will be a permanent thing. He argued that when you say something, good or bad, that the sound travels in waves, physics-wise. And his argument was that even if you can't hear it anymore, those sound waves are going across the entire universe. And I puzzled over that. I thought, wow. And I think I kind of shrugged my shoulders and said, I don't believe that. But what he was trying to talk about was sin. If you sin, it is forever, man. It just goes on and on and on. And here I'd like to share a little theology. I'm not trying to convert anybody. I am just trying to evangelize for literature. I'm trying to convert you to poetry. That's what I want you to. That's what I want to be an evangelist for. But I still want to say this because of what happened to me last night. The way my theology runs, there's 2 judgment days, and I'm saying this during the apocalypse. Almost no one knows this. Not even people of my faith tradition think in this way. There is something called the particular judgment. So when you die, and we all go there, can't get around it, as my dad said before he died. When you die, that's it. Time stops. You are outside of time. You are outside of space. You are outside of language. And there's a particular kind of judgment that happens that's pretty much just of you. Few know that there's a judgment day with a capital J, man. like the final judgment day, which happens at the end of the world. And you're judged a second time, and that is called the general judgment. The reason why that is necessary is because, and this is a hard way to think, and some of you are so young, this might be an impossible thought, but we have the idea that when you die, the things that you did, good and bad in your life, they continue. They continue to reverberate, like that preacher said. He was right. That dude was right. The analog would be when you take a stone and throw it into a pond that's still. Well, you can see the ripples. I do that all the time. And they go and they go and they go and they go. It is really an amazing way of thinking. The good and the bad that you do goes till the end of time, forever. We could go with bad guys for a second. Insert any dictator here, right? Hitler, Mussolini, Joseph Stalin, Karl Marx, who I think did some harm. Did I almost get political? I broke my rule. The evil that those guys do is still going on. So they have gotten a particular kind of judgment, and they got another one coming up. So why am I thinking in this way? I got an email last night from a student, from a woman who's now in her mid-40s. And she was in one of the first classes I taught. She was a 7th grader back in the 80s at Our Lady of Lourdes School in Little Falls, Minnesota, where I only spent 1 year. And she was part of one of those classes that just, I don't know if you know this, but sometimes classes get together and as they move through the building, as they go through the school, they just torment every teacher that they hit. They go down the hall like a fire. And they torment the 3rd grade teacher, the 4th grade teacher, the 5th grade teacher. She was part of one of those classes. They were just kind of hard, and I ran from them as from a burning building, even though someone at St. Ben's told me years ago, "You're born to teach middle schoolers." I think I'm born to teach everybody, but I was only there 1 year. And the woman that wrote me last night, I'm just going to say her first name. Her name was and is Janelle. No need to spill any more than that. And last night's email was really long. It was about 1,000 words long. 2 screens, single spaces. She spent some time on it, and she's a pretty decent writer, thanks to me. But when I read that, when I saw it, it's like, oh my gosh, here's Janelle again. My mind ran back to a long ago afternoon at that little tiny school in Little Falls. And the thing was, Janelle was kind of a loner. She was a nervous girl. She had only one friend. And her friend that sat next to her with dark hair was named Jill. And they had a little falling out that year. And I tried to do something. And so I sat her down and I said, well, I don't even remember what I said. I only remember how that ended. The kids were out kind of at recess, running around. We went into the teacher's lounge for a little while. Sat at the big table. I don't know, it's the only time I ever talked with a kid in there. Door open, of course. And I'll tell you something about myself. I'm a hugger. My Zoom people laughed about this today. They know I'm a hugger, and I wanted to hug every one of them. And that day, when we got done speaking, I gave Janelle a little hug. But the hard part about that moment was that she just recoiled from me immediately, just shirked back. And I just felt this little shudder run through her, and I looked into her eyes, her gray green eyes, and I thought, you just stepped back from me because some monster among us has done you harm. And my flash thought in my kid brain was, she's been sexually assaulted or sexually abused or maybe even raped. And I didn't say a word about it, did I? I should have. So many mistakes. I've made so many mistakes. It's the way you learn. So fast forward the clock, about 5 years ago, I was volunteering at CLC. I give of my time freely there, whether I'm getting paid for it or not. And somebody had asked me one day if I could spend a couple hours standing at a table at a college fair. I said, absolutely. And I was standing there, and I hadn't seen her in a very long time. She went to St. Ben's after that, and she came flying up to me. She had some kids with her. She was a para at a high school. And I was like, wow, Janelle. And I put out my arms and I hugged her. She didn't shirk that time. She hugged me back. And that evening, she wrote me an email to tell me how glad she was to see me again and what an important teacher I was to her and in the helping of her growing up. And I wrote her back that night. Again, this is about 4 or 5 years ago. And I said, listen, I got to know something right now. All those years ago when I hugged you in the teacher's lounge at Our Lady of Lourdes, you really stepped back from me in horror. Answer me this. Were you sexually abused or assaulted when you were a little girl? And she came right back with I absolutely was. It happened before my 7th grade year, and my suspicion was correct. So why am I telling you this? Because I'm keeping everything in sync, and this seems important to me. She wrote me an email last night. This time it was 1,000 words long. And here's what the video I made for Riverland is what provoked it. Over the week, I told you, over the weekend I made a video for Riverland teachers at the campuses down there. And I haven't heard a word from anybody down there on what they think of the video. But over the weekend I thought I should post up the video I made called The Reluctant Online Teacher. I try to make content. Why not? Why not? Facebook is fun to me. And I thought this might be a video for use. This could be used by someone, could have utility. And so I posted it up in the spirit of, hey, if you know anyone teaching online, maybe send this their way. Then I took it down. I don't know why. The video quickly had, 80, 85 views. But then partway through the weekend I thought, I made that just for Riverland teachers. I made that for my brothers and sisters at Riverland. In terms of rhetorical audience considerations, it doesn't need to be on my Facebook that has like 1,500 people that love me well. So I took it down, but not before Janelle saw it. And she wrote me, and I put it back up, by the way, today because of her. She wrote me this big email, and she told me something more dramatic this time out. She said, I just watched your video about reinventing yourself, and I want to tell you that it really inspired me. I just heard from another former student who's teaching, and it inspired her too, Christy Kramer. And Janelle told me something that she didn't tell me the first time out 5 years ago when we tried to clear the air on this. She's really struggling, and she's wondering if she should go back to school. She did finish a degree in psychology, but just taking a degree in psychology is pretty much useless. You have to get at least a master's degree if you're going to make anything happen with it. That's the old mythology on it anyway. She told me last night that if I had not been a teacher in her life, the teacher that I was, she would have certainly killed herself when she was a 7th grader. She said that I was the only thing that stood between her and that. I was her hedge against disaster. And she thanked me profusely and asked me if she should go back to school. She's still looking for my advice. She's in her 40s, and she was 12 then. And I told her all crises are spiritual. I also told her that I think an awful lot of us are making plans for a world that no longer exists, but I'll cover that idea on another day. I'm staying at my post until that happens. So, to finish the idea and to put something really beautiful before you, if you're thinking, wow, what a hero, what a great guy, well, that dude has serious valor, or if you're thinking this, I bet that was nice to get. I bet it was nice to get that email and be able to pat yourself on the back and go, look what I accomplished, I saved someone's life. I've done it many times, talked kids out of that. But because of the way I'm wired, because of the way my head works, that's not the way I was thinking. I wasn't going, oh, how wonderful I was. I was thinking back on that room, and I was wondering, in that classroom, who didn't I serve? What didn't I do that I should have done? Who did I not pay sufficient attention to in that long ago class of 7th graders? They're all grown up now. Paul raised his hand every time, and he was always wrong. Why couldn't I just will him into being smart? He wasn't. Yvette Inez, she wanted to be the dairy princess for Morrison County. Why didn't I sit her down and tell her, you know what, you're too cute for your own good. Being the dairy princess will harm you. It's proven that people who are like our homecoming queens, and I can prove that with my sister, they're harmed by it. They're actually done harm. They're unhappy. Dusty Wilner, whose dad was a woodcutter, which is a class of people who live in Little Falls. A class of men, they cut wood and then they take it to the cities where it's worth more and they sell it. And they go back and they cut more. Why couldn't I figure out how to help him find the courage to go to the public school in the afternoon to take a couple classes. Every time that happened, he got a stomachache. His stomach started hurting because he was so nervous. And he'd go lay in the nurse's office and on the cot, and I'd go sit in there and try to talk to him. Bonnie Bizdock, my first cutter. She has no idea I'm saying her name on the internet. Sobieski girl, Bonnie Bizdock. She was always cutting on herself with scissors or paper clips or anything that she could get that she could scrape her arm with. Why couldn't I figure that out? So that's how I think about doing good and evil doing. That's how I think about it. There's a line that Shakespeare got wrong. It's very famous. It's from Mark Antony in the funeral oration. Mark Antony at one point says while he's talking about his dead friend who he loved beyond any singing of it, he, in referring to Brutus, said, and we'll look at the speech later when we get further into our study of style. Mark Antony said, "The evil that men do lives after them. The good is oft interred with their bones." That's not quite right. The evil and the good that we do lives after us. You guys, remember that. Remember that, will you? Now I want to show you something beautiful and say something obvious. Thanks for putting up with me today for 21 minutes just sitting here at my desk. I'm well aware that you not only need different backgrounds once in a while, but I'm also conscious of, as I was 10 years ago, that I should exploit the beauty of my farm in central Minnesota to give you different backgrounds. And while the weather's good, got another 2 to 3 weeks of it, I'm sure, where I can film outside. I promise you that I'll do my best with that. I had the idea that I would shoot this vid in the middle of a field of drying soybeans rather. It's just so beautiful. They're just bronze against the blue sky, but it's windy today. And I'm a little tired out, so I'm just here. Now what I have for you next, and this is how we're going to end the day, this lesson. Didn't teach you a thing about writing? You wait till next time. I'm really going to bust out some gear. I was going to begin all my classes today, and you're one of the four, with a poem by Czesław Miłosz, which centers on the idea of something unhappening, something happening in reverse, maybe something terrible. I know of a number of poems where that happens, where something unhappens. I just, even though it's impossible, I do love the idea. And then I started thinking this morning when I was running, and I thought about Janelle and the idea that she had only one friend. And I want to run a story in honor of you. And I wish I could have written it, but it's not my story. It's from Michael Chabon, one of the fine writers in this country. And it'll not only it's not poetry, but it'll give us the feeling of the poetic, because it's that absolutely beautiful. And it's in honor of Janelle, and it is it's in honor of each and every one of you. If you were that kid, I left my music running. If you were that kid in school that had only one friend, this is for you. This is for you. It also was perfect for classical mythology today because it's about the mythological. It's about superheroes in part. And it's about wonder, one of our values, right? And it's about the power of a kid's imagination. So let me bring my computer up to power here, light-wise. All you got to do now is just sit and relax and hear one of the most perfect stories I've ever heard of in my life. And we're going to find out if it'll carry through this mic. And I bid you farewell, and I'll see you.
Arrived at Act 3 of our show. Act 3, Werewolves in Their Youth. We have this excerpt in this act from a short story by Michael Chabon.
I had known him as a bulldozer, as a samurai, as an android programmed to kill, as Plastic Man and Titanium Man and Matter Eater Lad, as a Buick Electra, as a Peterbilt truck, and even for a week as the Mackinac Bridge. But it was as a werewolf that Timothy Stokes finally went too far. I wasn't there when it happened. I was down in the ravine at the edge of the schoolyard, founding a capital for an empire of ants. I had just begun to describe, to myself and to the ants, the complicated rites sacred to the god whose worship I was imposing on them when I heard the first screams from the playground. The girls screamed at Timothy the same way every time he came after them, in unison and with a trill that sounded almost like delight, as if they were watching the family cat trot past with something bloody in its jaws. I scrambled up the side of the ravine and emerged as Timothy, shoulders hunched, arms outstretched, growled realistically and declared that he was hungry for the throats of puny humans. Now, Timothy said this or something like it every time he turned into a werewolf, and I would not have been too concerned if, in the course of his last transformation, he hadn't actually gone and bitten Virginia Pease on the neck. It was common knowledge around school that Virginia's parents had since written a letter to the principal, and that the next time Timothy Stokes hurt somebody, he was going to be expelled. Timothy was, in our teacher Mrs. Gladfelter's words, one strike away from an out. And there was a widespread, if unarticulated, hope among his classmates, their parents, and all of the teachers at Copeland Fork Elementary that one day soon he would provide the authorities with the excuse they needed to pack him off to special school. I stood there a while above my little city, watching Timothy pursue a snarling lupine course along the hopscotch crosses. I knew that someone ought to do something to calm him down, but I was the only one in our school who could have any reason to want to save Timothy Stokes from expulsion, and I hated him with all my heart. "I've been cursed for 300 years, he declaimed. He was wearing his standard uniform of white dungarees and a plain white undershirt, even though it was a chilly afternoon in October, and all the rest of us had long since been bundled up for autumn in corduroy and down. "I've been cursed to stalk the night through all eternity," he went on. "I've been searching for prey as lovely as you." He lunged toward the nearest wall of the cage of girls around him. The girls peeled away from him as though sprayed with a hose, bumped shoulders, clung shrieking to each other's sleeves. Some of them were singing the song we sang about Timothy Stokes. "Timothy Stokes, Timothy Stokes, you're going to the home for crazy folks." And the one singing the loudest was Virginia Pease herself, in her furry black coat and her bright red tights. Virginia had blonde hair, and she was the only girl in the 5th grade with pierced ears and painted fingernails, and Timothy Stokes was in love with her. I knew this because the Stokeses lived next door to us, and I was privy to all kinds of secrets about Timothy that I had absolutely no desire to know. I forbade myself with an almost religious severity to show Timothy any kindness or regard. I would never let him sit beside me, at lunch or in class, and if he tried to talk to me on the playground, I ignored him. It was bad enough that I had to live next door to him. It was toward Virginia that Timothy now advanced, a rattling growl in his throat. She drew back behind her girlfriends, and their screaming now grew less melodious, less purely formal. Timothy crouched down on all fours. He rolled his wild white eyes and took a last look around him. That was when he saw me, halfway across the yellow distance of the soccer field. He was looking at me, I thought, as though he hoped I might have something I wanted to tell him. Instantly, I dropped flat on my belly, my heart pounding the way it did when I was spotted trying to spy on a baseball game or a birthday party. I slid down into the ravine backward. At first, I could hear the girls shouting for Mrs. Gladfelter, and then I heard Mrs. Gladfelter herself sounding very angry. Then the bell sounded the end of recess, and everything got very quiet. But I just stayed there in the ravine. I told myself that I didn't feel sorry at all for stupid old Timothy Stokes. But then I would remember the confused look in his eyes as I had abandoned him to his fate, to all the unimaginable things that would be done to him in the fabulous corridors of the special school. I kept recalling something that I had heard Timothy's mother say to mine just a couple of days earlier. "You know," Althea Stokes had told my mother in that big, sad, donkey voice of hers, "your little Paul is Timothy's only friend." I decided to spend the afternoon in the ravine. The sun started down behind the embankment, and the moon, rising early, emerged from the rooftops of the houses somebody was putting up in front of the school. The moon, I noticed, was not quite full. I didn't hear the scrape of footsteps until they were just above my head. "Paul," said Mrs. Gladfelter, leaning over the lip of the ravine, hands against her thighs. "Paul Covell, what on earth are you doing out here?" "Nothing," I said. "I didn't hear the bell." "Paul," she said, "now listen to me, Paul. I need your help." "With what?" I didn't think she looked angry, but her face was upside down and it was hard to tell. "With Timothy, Paul. I guess he's just very wound up right now. He's pretending he's a werewolf today, and even though that's fine, and we all know how Timothy is sometimes, we have serious things to discuss with him, and we'd like him to stop pretending for just a little while." "What if he isn't pretending?" I said. "What if he really is a werewolf?" "Maybe he is, Paul, but if you would just come inside and talk to him for a little bit, I think we might be able to persuade him to change back into Timothy. You're his friend, Paul. I asked him if he'd like to talk to you, and he said yes." "I'm not his friend, Mrs. Gladfelter. I swear to God, I can't do anything." "Paul, Timothy is in trouble. He needs your help, and I need your help too. Now, if you come right this minute and get up out of that dirt, then I'll forget that you didn't come in from recess. If you don't come back inside, I'll have to speak to your mother." She held out her hand. "Now, come on, Paul, please." And so I took her hand and let her pull me out of the ravine and across the deserted playground, aware that in doing so I was merely proving the unspoken corollary that my mother had left hanging the other morning in the air between her and Mrs. Stokes. There was a song about me, too, I'm afraid, a popular little number that went, "What's that smello? Paul Covello. He's a big fat hippo jello. He's a snoop. He smells like poop. He smells like tomato beef alphabet soup." Timothy Stokes, I knew, as I followed Mrs. Gladfelter down the long, silent hallway to the office, hating him more and more with each step, was my only friend. Timothy was sitting in a corner of the office, trapped in an orange vinyl armchair. There was a Roman numeral 3 scratched into his left cheek, and his brilliant white shirt and trousers were patterned with a camouflage of grass and dirt and asphalt. "Well now, Timothy," Mrs. Gladfelter took me by the shoulders and maneuvered me around her. "Look who I found." "Hey, Timothy," I said. Timothy didn't look up. Mrs. Gladfelter gave me a gentle push toward him in the small of my back. "Why don't you sit down, Paul?" "No!" I didn't want to be left alone with Timothy, not because I was afraid of him, but because I was afraid that somebody would come into the office and see us sitting there, two matching rejects in matching orange chairs. "That's enough now, Paul," said Mr. Buterbaugh, the principal, his friendly smile looking more false than usual. "Sit down." "It's all right," said Mrs. Gladfelter. "You see what you can do about helping Timothy turn back into Timothy. We're just going to give you a little privacy." She followed Mr. Buterbaugh into his office and then poked her head back around the door. "I'm going to leave this door open in case you need us, all right?" There were 3 chairs next to Timothy's. I took the farthest and showed him my back so that anyone passing by the windows of the office would not be able to conclude that he and I were engaged in any sort of conversation at all. "Are you expelled?" I said. There was no reply. "Are you, Timothy?" Again he said nothing, and I couldn't stop myself from turning around to look at him. "Timothy, are you expelled?" "I'm not Timothy, Professor," said Timothy, gravely, but not without a certain air of satisfaction. "I'm afraid your precious antidote didn't work." "Come on, Timothy," I said. "Cut it out. The moon's not even full today." Now he turned toward me. "Where were you?" he said. "I was looking for you." "I was in the ditch." "With the ants?" I nodded. "I heard you talking to them before." So? So? Are you Ant-Man?" "No, dummy." "Why not?" "Because I'm not anybody. You're not anybody either." We fell silent for a while and just sat there, not looking at each other, kicking at the legs of our chairs. I could hear Mrs. Gladfelter and Mr. Buterbaugh talking softly in his office. Mr. Buterbaugh called her Elizabeth. The telephone rang. A light flashed twice on the secretary's phone, then held steady. "Thanks for calling back, Dr. Schachter," I heard Mr. Buterbaugh say. "Yes, I'm afraid so." "I went to see Dr. Schachter a couple times," I said. "He had Micronauts and the Fembots." "He has Stretch Armstrong, too," said Timothy. "I know." "Why did you go see him?" Timothy said. "Did your mother make you?" "Yeah," I said. "How come?" "I don't know. She said I was having problems with my anger. I don't know. I guess I was mad about my dad and things." "He had to go to jail," Timothy said. "Your dad." "Just for one night." "How come?" "He had too much to drink," I said. "Did you visit him in jail?" Timothy said. "No, stupid. God, you're such a retard. You belong in special school, Timothy. I hope they make you eat special food and wear a special helmet or something." I heard the distant slam of the school's front door and then a pair of hard shoes knocking along the hall. "Here comes your retard mother," I said. "What kind of special helmet?" said Timothy. "Ant-Man wears a helmet." Mrs. Stokes entered the office. She was a tall, thin woman, much older than my mother, with long gray hair and red, veiny hands. Every morning, she made Timothy pancakes for his breakfast, which sounded okay until you found out that she put things in them like carrots and leftover pieces of corn. "Oh, hello, Paul," she said in her Eeyore voice. "Mrs. Stokes," said Mrs. Gladfelter, coming out of the principal's office. "It's been kind of a long afternoon for Timothy, I'm afraid." "How is Virginia?" said Mrs. Stokes. She still hadn't looked at Timothy. "Oh, she'll be fine," Mr. Buterbaugh said. "Just a little shaken up. We sent her home early. Of course," he added, "her parents are going to want to speak to you." "Of course," said Mrs. Stokes. "I'm ready to do whatever you think would be best for Timothy." "I'm not Timothy," said Timothy. "Oh, please, Timmy, stop this nonsense for once." "I'm cursed." He leaned over and brought his face very close to mine. "Tell them about the curse, Professor." I looked at Timothy, and for the first time saw that a thin, dark down of wolfish hair had grown upon his cheek. Then I looked at Mr. Buterbaugh, and found that he was watching me with an air of earnest expectancy, as though he honestly thought there might be an eternal black magical curse on Timothy, and was more than willing to listen to anything I might have to say on the subject. I shrugged. "Are you going to make him go to special school?" I said. "All right, Paul, thank you," said Mrs. Gladfelter. "You may go back to class now." "See you later, Timothy," I said. He didn't answer me. He had started to growl again. As I followed the secretary out of the office, I looked back and saw Mr. Buterbaugh and Mrs. Gladfelter and poor old Mrs. Stokes standing in a hopeless circle around Timothy. I thought for a second, and then I turned back toward them and raised an imaginary rifle to my shoulder. "This is a dart gun," I announced. Everyone looked at me, but I was talking to Timothy now. I was almost, but not quite, embarrassed. "It's filled with darts of my special antidote, and I made it stronger than it used to be, and it's going to work this time. And also there's a tranquilizer mixed in." Timothy looked up and bared his teeth at me, and I took aim right between his eyes. I jerked my hands twice and went, "Phoop, phoop." Timothy's head snapped back, and his eyelids fluttered. He shook himself all over. He swallowed once. Then he held his hands out before him, as if wondering at their hairless pallor. "It seems to have worked," he said, his voice cool and reasonable and fine. Anyone could see he was still playing his endless game, but all the grown-ups, Mr. Buterbaugh in particular, looked very pleased with both of us. "Thank you very much, Paul," he said. I'm not Paul, I said. Everybody laughed but Timothy Stokes.
An excerpt from Michael Chabon's short story, Werewolves in Their Youth, from the collection of short stories of the same name. Michael Chabon's latest novel is Telegraph Avenue.
All right. Well, if you stuck with me here, kind of a weird thing to do, right? Run audio. I could have just posted that up, but I ran this by all my students today because it seemed important. And I have this thing about imagining that we can have shared art experiences together, even remotely. Just to fill you in, that was Michael Chabon, the American writer, and the radio show. It's my favorite. I've already talked about it and posted up on it in D2L. This American Life is an absolute fantastic radio show. It's on the weekend. I don't know what the schedule's like down there for Minnesota Public Radio or National Public Radio, but Ira Glass is a wonderful man, and there's hundreds of fantastic stories about our country, our great country, there for the listening. Great seeing you, and I'll get another vid up for Wednesday with Student Success Day at my college. I can spend a couple days concentrating just on you.